Hey, welcome back to 28 Days and Beyond,
where we talk about our history, our heritage, and our culture.
I'm Amari.
I'm Charisma. Thanks for joining us again.
Of course. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing just fine.
Wonderful,
That's
Amari.
It. Yeah. Another day, another episode. What are we talking about today?
We're talking about politics.
Okay.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, politics as usual. Jay-Z back in the day, though. Reasonable doubt. No? Okay,
yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah.
No, just politics in general. I think on the cusp of having this big election with your president, Donald Trump.
Oh, I thought you were talking about T'Challa, the Black Panther.
No,
oh, okay.
But I am very excited about that because that's happening very soon.
Right.
No, but there's been this conversation and this debate as it pertains to the Black vote.
Mm-hmm.
And, you have a lot of people that still feel like it doesn't matter whether they vote or not as far as the Black community and the effects of that when we don't show up.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's one of the things we should get into a little bit today.
Definitely.
What else?
So what are they? So they're trying to say that the reason this dude got in office is because Black people didn't show up?
I mean, some people are saying that was part of it.
Yeah.
Kind of like you can't complain if you're not happy with the person that's in office and you didn't.
If you didn't do your
if you didn't do your part as far as going out to actually state like, okay, this is the person that I want to be in office.
Right.
With this particular election, there was also like a lesser of two evils conversation that was happening a lot.
Yeah, the lesser of two evils is still evil.
Yes, it is. And I feel like that's why a lot of people decided to not vote at all or to vote independently.
Mm-hmm.
And
which they say, voting independent in something like this is really just throwing your vote away anyway.
Yeah.
Right. Which, it's been a year already, which is kind of mind-boggling to me.
It's crazy.
I mean, it makes for great entertainment, you know what I'm saying?
But I remember that day like it was yesterday.
Word.
And just the angst that I felt. And at a certain point, I had to turn off the television because I couldn't stomach it. And I knew that I was going to wake up to like foolishness.
So foolishness. I mean,
but I said, you know what? I'm going to try to sleep tonight. And the only way I'm going to sleep tonight is if I don't focus on this anymore.
But you know what, though? Because this lesser of two evils conversation, I think one of the things that happens, it actually happens quite often with presidential elections, is people begin to question the validity of the entire electoral process, the electoral college, so on and so forth. Oh, that really doesn't, why does this state have this much and it only has this many people, so on and so forth. But then that conversation about if you vote independent, you are essentially throwing your vote away. I mean, one of the things that always sticks out for me is how flawed this electoral system is. I mean, it's primarily a two-party system, right? And we see some other countries and places like Europe where they have multiple parties, multiple voices are represented, constituent groups, so on and so forth. I mean, that may dramatically change the face of American politics, but as it is now, I mean, like you said, the lesser of two evils, but as some folks would say, even Hillary Clinton still represented corporate interests that really wouldn't trickle down to the...
And I think that was a huge portion of it. And a lot of people said that if the Democratic Party hadn't done what they did to undermine Bernie, that we might be in a much different place in terms of who was in office because so many more people, I feel like, would have been behind him because he didn't have all of the corruption behind him or these ideas that Hillary brought with her from when her husband was in office. So
today we're joined by Raymond, who is a law student at Villanova Law School, and he's going to break down some of these issues, and we're going to keep the conversation going when we come back on 28 Days and Beyond.
Welcome back to 28 Days and Beyond. We are now joined by our guest, Raymond. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about you, Ryan.
So I'm a first-generation Haitian American. Nice. My parents are from Haiti. I was born in New York, raised in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, lived in New York for a little bit, and then now I'm here in Pennsylvania to attend Villanova Law School.
Nice.
That's what's up. What are you studying?
I'm interested in entertainment and media law. So that's the one I'm studying now. But I'm also just open to just learning about the government, and law school has been very interesting. Just open my eyes to different things that I feel like we shouldn't learn in law school, but actually should learn as just a community.
What are some of those things?
So I'm part of this organization called Street Law, and it's a grassroots organization where we go out to the community and we talk about like the Constitution, we talk about your rights, and just actually talk to the everyday citizen about the law. Because the law can be kind of confusing, kind of legalese, and not understanding. So, my job is to kind of just break it down so people can actually understand and use it in their day-to-day.
Have you found that you having those kind of conversations and discussions when you're out there on the street has opened people's eyes up to some things that maybe they didn't understand, some concepts as far as the law?
Definitely. I think the Constitution, for instance, a lot of people think the Constitution applies to them, like the First Amendment right and my freedom of speech. And like if we take back the Colin Kaepernick situation of whether or not, you know, the NFL can fire them or not, technically it could because they're a private organization. So the Constitution law actually applies to government officials or state actors and things like that. So once people have that understanding of like, wow, really? I don't have First Amendment rights when I'm at work? What does that actually mean?
Yeah, but that's interesting though, because you know then you see these instances where basically you're saying there's no recourse for an employee who was fired because of something they said while they were on, you know, Facebook or social media.
Right, and that's another like interesting thing about what's happening now with social media is like how far can a company actually regulate? You know, you have certain things such as privacy or maybe Title VII, which is the discrimination of the Civil Rights Act. So unless it's a discrimination against your sex, your race, your color, national origin, or religion, if it doesn't fall in the category, it's really hard for the employee.
So what is it that we can do as citizens to actually have a voice?
I think it's definitely gaining knowledge and understanding. So like I said, I learned a lot in law school that I didn't learn beforehand. So learning about the Constitution, learning about voting and how that impacts the community and how they can actually make a difference. I think people, once they start to educate themselves and understand how the world really works, then you're able to infiltrate and hopefully break the system.
We know you have a passion for politics.
Right.
So how do you see things sort of playing themselves out on the national stage in 2018 right now?
I think 2018 right now, I think a lot more people are becoming more involved, and I think they understand not just from the national level, but just from the local level as well. You have a lot of local officials who are minorities or Black or Spanish, gay, lesbians who are now actually entering into political sphere, and that's really helping changing the conversation because now we finally have a seat at the table. Because before the issue wasn't having a seat at the table, where now we can actually slowly start to get there. It's not where we wanted to be, but I think it's just a start to hopefully changing the whole course.
Maria and I were talking a little bit about the concept of having a seat at the table and how a lot of people, a lot of Black people feel like even now that they don't really have a voice. So whether they vote or not, it doesn't really matter because their voice isn't going to be heard in the long run. So what would you say to those people to kind of encourage them to get outside of that mindset?
I would still say vote. I still say participate. I would still say get to know your electoral officials. Think about, again, and it doesn't have to always be on a national scale. We can do it directly and start within the community. So if you have an issue about the school board, join the school board and be a director of the school board officials and now be able to make a direct impact immediately versus waiting for the government. So I think we can start from the bottom down and go up. So I think if they just learn more about it.
So we have to take a break, but when we come back, I want to jump into this conversation or continue this conversation with a seat at the table. Because my question has always been, you know, folks are fighting for a seat at the table, but are never questioning what is actually served at that table. You understand what I'm saying? Now, I'm not trying to take the metaphor too far, but in other words, it's like, okay, yeah, we just got to be at the table. You get at the table and be like, yo, but this isn't healthy food, or this isn't food that is consistent with my needs, my nutritional needs, or so. You understand what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying.
So when we talk about Black people in particular, with reference to a system that has historically marginalized, oppressed, and undermined their well-being, then why would we be so intent simply at gaining a seat at that table? So that's what I want to jump into when we get back. I know Charisma has some views on that topic, and you do as well. But we'll be right back with more 28 Days and Beyond.
Welcome back to 28 Days and Beyond. We are still here with Ryan, and we are talking a seat at the table. What does that mean as it pertains to Black folks in this country?
I think a seat at the table allows you to give the recommendation, because sometimes, you know, you mentioned the fact that you don't necessarily know what's on the menu, but how can you change the menu, or how do you know what to actually recommend? You know, with Black folks, I think we season everything. We make everything cool. So I think us being at the table.
So you're gonna bring the hot sauce
exactly
with the foil, the tin foil on top. Yeah, anyway.
Exactly. You know, and we add the seasoning, add the flavor, and I think that's important as well. So we don't want to just completely ignore the invitation and then not do anything. Then all of a sudden, now we got this machine who was like, oh well, we tried to give you a seat at the table. You didn't want it, so don't be mad now that we can't do anything for you.
Now, one of the things that we've spoken about before, you and I, is, so it's not just about, you could say, right, let's just get a seat at the table because they're offering, as opposed to saying, yo, why don't we build our own table, right, where we can set the rules and so on and so forth. and I hear this in your conversation about really why local politics is actually potentially an effective measure.
Right, because I think it does create your own table. I think it allows Black people to actually create the table and take care of their community. I mean, we've had examples of that before, and then unfortunately, with I think the city in Oklahoma where they had the whole
Tulsa,
they had their own Black community, and they were able to thrive and able to make it. And I think again, history shows we can do it, and I think we should be able to do it again. And this time, just power ourselves with more knowledge and more information to be able to carry that on.
But the other side of that story, though, is that history has shown that we can do it. We don't doubt that. What we don't doubt is that it will
when
drop
we
bombs
do
on
it,
us. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Then it's taken away from us.
And it's hard, but I mean, we can't operate in fear because I mean, if you think about just even voting in the Voting Rights Act and Martin Luther King and John Lewis walking across the bridge, if they stopped and was just like, all right, they're going to bomb us, then where would we be now? So, I mean, Black people have been resilient and will continue to be resilient. And I think we still continue to keep going at it. Eventually, I mean, I'm optimistic, but eventually we'll definitely be able to make a mark and have it stand its ground.
So we're talking a little bit about the power of our vote locally, making our voice heard locally. What can we do on a larger scale and on a wider scale to let our voices be heard?
I think, we definitely got to get at a table. I think look at Maxine Waters or you look at John Lewis, and I think they're definitely being our voice. I think we also need to encourage them as well, and also look to them as heroes. I don't think that we need to wait until someone passes away before we recognize the greatness that they do. You got a lot of people who are making, Cory Booker, again, Maxine Waters, again, John Lewis. You have these individuals who have these powerful voices, and they're using their voices. So we need to stand behind them and also help project it, so that way we can yell from the back and they can hear us all the way in the front.
So I've got to say, right, because I definitely understand some of what you're working towards, but I'm still. We don't have any historical evidence that's in other words, you say you're optimistic, but the historical record would show that actually there's nothing to be optimistic about, right? Because we've tried a million different ways. Even got yourself a Black president, right?
Yeah,
but the sort of material conditions of Black people in this country have actually persistently gotten worse, specifically since Brown versus Board of Education. Now schools are more desegregated than they have ever been. The consequent integration, so-called integration, was actually desegregation, which is fundamentally different, has resulted in all the indices of quality of life that Black people have actually gone down in, right, since that time. So in other words, what are seen as these civil rights gains have resulted over the past 40 or 50 years in the material conditions of Black people deteriorating. We may have more individuals going to college or getting these, CEO positions, but as terms of the masses, we still find ourselves in the bottom.
We do, and I don't disagree with you on that, but again, still to kind of go back to the optimism, I think us going back, even if we make it to the top where we get out of the hood or whatever the case may be, I think it's also we need to come back, because a lot of times what happens is we get successful, we kind of forget about the community or we move on to other things. So I think it's also, again, bringing back those resources and helping within the community and help really build that out. And again, take it from the bottom up to the top. We have to go somewhere, because even again in history, we have done that and we still can continue to do it. Let's not lose that spirit. Because even Barack Obama, and a lot of people say that he may not have done something for Black people, but there's an intangible side to it where now you have a lot more people going to college, getting an education, getting involved in politics. So he brought that hope aspect, and I think if we continue to keep that hope aspect, they'll be able to move us forward.
Wow. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Ryan.
Awesome,
we appreciate the work that you're doing in the community, and we look forward to hearing more awesome things from you.
Thank you guys very much.
Thanks a lot.
We'll be back with more 28 Days and Beyond right after this.
And welcome back to 28 Days. Charisma.
Yes. That was
a good conversation.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It really was. And interestingly, you brought up Brown versus Board of Education. My great-grandparents were two of the original plaintiffs in Briggs versus Elliott, which became one of the 5 cases in Brown versus Board of Education.
So your family is just all connected to Black history.
Yeah.
That's what's up.
That was amazing. Growing up and hearing the stories, and actually got an opportunity to meet Thurgood Marshall.
Wow.
When I was a kid, who laid, the foundation.
Foundation for right, exactly.
Yeah, so it's pretty incredible.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, I obviously, right, so things like, Brown versus Board and a lot of those sort of landmark cases that were happening in, the 50s and the 60s were advancing, civil rights.
Yes.
One of the things that you had mentioned before was, voter apathy, particularly amongst Black people. So, I don't really feel like my vote is going to make a difference. And then there are, of course, the other voices that are saying, but if you don't vote, you have no right to complain.
Right.
How you feel about that?
You know, I grew up in a family where voting was always something that was really important. Not just for the sake of voting, but because, you know, people died so that we could have the right to vote.
Yeah.
And it never really mattered whether or not the outcome that you wanted was the outcome that you got. It was a matter of taking a stance and doing what you could do to let that stance be known. Do I understand the voter apathy in the Black community? Yeah, I do. I understand what it feels like to feel like your voice is not being heard, but your voice is definitely not going to be heard if you don't speak. So that's always been my stance.
You know, but the thing, so this is two things in what you said. Number one, I think though that this, you know, we hear it all the time. When people dies for the right to vote, but of course a right is to be exercised, whether you know or not exercised as you see fit. You have the ability to do it if you
option to do that.
And if there's nobody who's worth voting for, right? Because I mean, come on, I can't even remember the last election before Obama. You know, when Black people are like, yo, we definitely riding with this, right?
Right.
So in other words, it's like you really spend most of your political life voting against somebody as opposed to for somebody, which to me is indicative of a flawed system or the failure of, you know, qualified candidates to participate. I would probably agree that it was probably the former is a flawed system. But the second thing to me is that, you know, there's an overemphasis on electoral politics in the sense that it's like, yo, you didn't vote, well, you can't do right. As opposed to saying that like there are other ways that we can be taking political action, other ways that we can be engaging with our communities to effectively
get them. Some of those ways are.
So some of those ways, I think, you know, meeting whatever the immediate needs are. So, you know, so Ryan talked about, you know, the school board as an example.
Yes.
Another example is, you know, food drives, clothing drives, the creation of, you know, in parts of Philly, what they call food deserts. Well, there's also, Philly has one of the highest concentrations of urban gardens in the country. So what about creating some, you know, alternative ways of distributing, you know, fresh produce and things like that? It's really a more grassroots approach that requires a lot of time and a lot of energy, but I think it has more immediate results than casting a vote in the hopes that somebody who you wanted to get elected will get elected, or that person
that you don't want to be elected,
or even the one who you did want to get elected will actually act on what he said or she said they would do. But obviously this is an expansive topic, right?
Yes.
You know, here at 28 Days and Beyond, this is something we always get into, and we will continue to, but unfortunately
and continue working towards solutions.
There it is, right, there it is. But unfortunately, you know, the time is up.
That time.
Right. So this has been another episode of 28 Days and Beyond,
where we talk about our history, our heritage, and our culture. We'll see you next time.